So to start with, we're going to need an animation where he just reaches forward and grabs an object. So let's open up our, let's use the base pose sequence. So when you open that, you should see the character. And if you click on see our mannequin body, you should see all the controls. So we'll just animate this character to reach forward some point, grab some imaginary object, and then just bring it back. So firstly, what I'll do is I'll save this sequence because we don't want to overwrite the one that we've already got. So I'll click on Actions, Save As, and I'll call it Grab Animation. So if you click on the global control, so drop down, see our mannequin body, global control. At the bottom, you'll see the arm L FKIK switch and the arm R FKIK switch. So this switches it from forward kinematics, where if we rotate one joint, the rest of them come with it, to inverse kinematics, where we just have a target point that the hand can reach towards. So if I just tick that for, I'll just do it for the right arm. So now the right arm is just targeting this point. So wherever I move this to, the IK solver adjusts the lower arm and the upper arm to reach that point. And I'll leave the left arm in FK for now. We might switch that, but I'm not too sure. So this is going to be the initial pose that he's in. And then at some point, he's going to reach forward and grab something. So let's go to frame 15. This doesn't matter strictly what exact frame. This is just however it looks best. And we can move things around if we need to and retime the animation. So at frame 15, he's going to have his hand reaching forward. So I'll just position, so I've selected the IK control, which is this cube around his right hand. I'll just move this somewhere in front of the character and rotate his hand around. And I'll rotate his body because he's, as he's reaching towards it, he's going to shift his body slightly. And the body control, maybe some of these, like around the abs. Maybe his shoulder goes forward a bit. And this circle there is the pole vector control. Oops, I had two things selected there. And this controls the direction that the elbow is trying to point in. So it's solving to make the hand reach wherever that cube is set to. But then we also need to tell it where his elbow should point. So I'm just making some adjustments to that. And I'll just put that somewhere in front of the character, like that. And we can just scrub through to see what that looks like. So he lifts his arm up, reaches towards something, and I'll just press play down here so you can see what it looks like in real time. And from there, let's pretend that he's just grabbing an object. So I'll make some adjustments to the hand first, just so he's sort of grasping around an object. So there's this thumb control, which you sometimes have to just fly into the character to see. I don't know if I mentioned that earlier. I recorded the other bits on a different day. So I'll just select that thumb control, rotate this around. So it's going to be like he's just grabbing some invisible sphere. And I'll switch to local for rotating the fingers. So you can imagine that he's just grabbed some object there that's somewhere in front of him. I think I might just move the hand further so it's got a bit more range on it. And let's just scrub through that to see if that looks all good. And I think a few frames before, what I'll do is I'll just extend the hand out so the fingers go out as if he's just grabbing around the object, or like anticipating grabbing the object. So he reaches forward, grabs the object, and then he's going to bring that back towards his body. But after he grabs it, let's just say for a few frames, he's just kind of continuing with the motion. So still moving forward slightly, maybe just twist his hand as he grabs it. And that seems a bit quick. So to move all of these keyframes at once, I'll just scroll up, minimize CR Mannequin body, and drag select around the last keyframe. I'll just shift that out a bit. It still seems a bit dramatic and fast there. I'll just try slowing that down further. I think what I'll do is I'll just go to this keyframe and reduce how much it's actually overshooting there. And maybe not twist it quite as far. And also, it shouldn't just be the hand that continues moving. His body's also, needs to come to a halt. So around there, I'll just add some twist to the body. I think his hand is still twisting a bit too much there. It should just be like a subtle overshoot as he sort of grabs the object. And I think I'll just speed it up again. So back to the CR Mannequin body, just select the box around that, drag the keyframe. And then he's going to bring it back towards his body. So at the bottom right here, you can change the view range and then the working range. So the working range, I'll just change this to 60 for 60 frames. And then we can click on this to just expand the view. And then we can drag out the actual animation range as far as we want. So I've just dragged it there. Ultimately, he wants to end up in the starting pose. So what we'll do is we'll just select all of the keyframes at the very start from frame 0. And we'll paste this somewhere at the end. So I've chosen frame 55. So he reaches forward, grabs it, and then his arm just goes back. I think what we'll do is we'll make it look like he's kind of putting it in his pocket or, holstering it or whatever. So after he grabs it, we'll move his arm back faster and towards his hip. And that lifts up a bit. And I'm only using this for demonstration purposes, so this animation's not going to be perfect. But I'll just rotate his shoulder back as he does that, and maybe his chest. And then we'll make quite a quick motion as if he's just putting it in his pocket. Or again, he's, a holster or whatever he's doing. And then maybe just have it lift up and out before the end of the animation. And I think I'll increase the time to 90 frames. Then we've got a bit more space to work with. And then this final frame, we can move out. So this frame where he kind of moves away, I think what we'll do is we'll make it lift up again. So it's kind of like he's pushed it into his pocket and then lifts his hand back out. Okay, so that kind of works as a base animation. I'm just going to go through and try to improve a little, a few bits. So the main thing I'm noticing is his left arm looks quite static. As he turns, his left arm's just kind of locked in place. So now we can just go in and make some adjustments to that. So his upper arm, there's no keys in this track other than the very start and the very end. So as he swings around, we'll just rotate his arm backwards. And then he sort of swings back and we'll make his arm just go forwards a little bit. Maybe even further than that. And then I'll make his lower arm swing a bit as well. And that's slightly delayed from the upper arm. So I'll just play through so we can see what we've got. I think overall his arm might be a bit too far forwards, his left arm. So at this point, I'll rotate it back still. Okay, so it's quite subtle, but there's just some like wobbling of his upper arm and his lower arm. So it just makes it look a bit more natural. And we can maybe rotate this shoulder back. I think maybe his arm will bring it towards his body more. It looks a little bit outstretched. I'm just retiming the keys a little bit. And just in case we don't do anything with the head, so we're not doing the aim directly to the target point with the head, I will just animate the head as well. So when it goes to here, because his body's twisted, his head's gone to the side. So I'll just rotate his head so it's pointing towards the target. And then maybe here, just as he's putting it in his pocket, I'll lean his chest over slightly. So he's kind of leaning to his left. So he grabs it, comes back, and then around here, I'll add a keyframe. So I'm pressing S now to manually add a keyframe there, because we didn't change any value, but I wanted a keyframe. So press S to create a keyframe in this track. And then on this keyframe, I'm just going to move that out a bit, just so there's a bit of a delay. And I'll just twist his body slightly to his left. And then back. Okay, that looks a bit goofy. I'll just change the timing of it. And you can just use the pauses that I've created if you downloaded the sample project. But it's worthwhile just, learning the basics of doing simple animations, because, this is nothing too complex. You should be able to just figure out how to make an animation that looks decent for grabbing an object. I'm just basically playing through to see if anything looks weird with the timing. And I think his arm goes a bit too fast for his chest now. So I'll just make sure his chest is rotating fast enough. So around this point, I think I'll get his chest to rotate like that. And I'll just click this to loop the animation. That's just for the sake of playback. It's not actually changing anything with the animation. And I'll put the play range just to the very last frame. So that's frame 64 in this case. And I think when he grabs it, his arm looks a bit static. So his hand looks like it locks in place a bit too much. We kind of want it to lock in place because he's, picking something up, but maybe it's just a bit too much. I'm just going to move it forward while he's picking it up. And we could maybe retime that just so he picks it up quicker, but we don't know what object he's picking up. This could just be, it could be something heavy where he has to get a proper grip on it first. It could be something light where it'd probably be a quicker grab. But for the sake of example, I think this should work. So it just reaches towards some arbitrary point that we've chosen. And keep in mind that I've not actually chosen a very specific point. It's not like I've forced it to be, let's say 100 units in front of the character and 150 units up from the ground or anything like that. This is a completely arbitrary point. So this means that this technique would work with any animation you get. So if you just downloaded some pickup animation, you'd be able to make it work with that. You don't need to craft the animations around applying this technique where we're going to make the offsets. So just save that sequence and export the animation. So SKM Animsimple, bake animation sequence. I'll save it in the animation and blends folder. I'll call it grab animation and export that. Open it up and save again just to make sure it's properly saved. So let's just take note of the time in the animation where he's actually grabbing it. So I think there is when you would actually attach, if it was an object in the world like an actor, you'd attach it to the hand at this point, just when his fingers close in. So that's frame 15. So that's all good. So now we're going to actually apply that and put that into the animation graph so that it plays the animation when we, let's say we left click. And then we'll make it so it does it dynamically based on the actual position of the object in the world. So we can close sequencer now. Let's go to navigate to our grab animation. Right. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to convert this to an animation montage. And what that'll allow us to do is make it so we can play it for a specific slot. And what a slot is in the animation graph, it will not play anything, it will not make any change unless that animation is playing. So if we play an animation for a specific slot, it's as if this, as an example, this is the default slot that was part of the inbuilt setup. It's as though that was just an animation node playing through. And that means that we can just trigger it when we need to from, let's say, the third person character. So when we left click, we'll just play a slot animation here. And it'll make more sense once we start actually setting that up if you're not familiar with animation slots. So just go to your grab animation, right click, and we're going to do create anim montage. And that's created a new asset for us. Open that up. We just press save. So you'll see here that it's set to default group.default slot. And we want to change that to a custom slot. So on the bottom right, you probably will see anim slot manager. If you don't see that, window, and then go to anim slot manager just to make sure you see that tab. So we're going to add a new slot, and I'll call this hand grab animations, because we might have multiple that all play through this same slot, so it'd all be treated like it's in the same place in the animation graph. But we might have, you know, a left hand grab, a right hand grab, whatever it's going to be. So we'll just have hand grab animations as a slot that we're playing through. And just down here, we need to make sure that we set this to slot name, hand grab animations. And the animation resets when you do that. If you just close the montage and open it again, you'll be able to see it again. There might be some refresh option as well. Whatever. So also, whilst we're here, what we're going to do with this animation montage is we're going to add a curve which is going to give some information to Control Rig about how far into the animation the character is. So whilst doing this, we want it, when he reaches, let's say, frame 15, we want to make sure that at this point, that is when the character is actually grabbing the object. So we'll be adjusting the pose using the full body RK node to make sure that that point where his hand is now is actually on the target. But for Control Rig to know when to apply the modifications that we're going to make, we need a curve to kind of say, okay, here, don't make any modification. Gradually ramp up the modification to here, and then roll it off so everything goes back to normal. So that then all the changes that we make to the dynamic position of the hand only happens when the character is actually reaching for the object and not when the hand's just in its neutral pose or when it returns back. Anyway, so on the curves, so you should see at the bottom left, curves, we're going to do add curve, create curve, and I'll call this hand grab curve. And you'll see this line appears at the bottom. What you can do is you can select the curve drop down there and do edit curve. And then you still see the timeline here. And what we're going to do is add some points to this curve just so we can sort of tell it where in the animation the character's fully reaching for the object. So let's start with a keyframe around here somewhere, so near the start. So if you just right click on this line, this will eventually be our curve, but currently it's just a line, and go to add key. You'll see that a key has been created there. And then when the character has grabbed the object, and we'll say that that's, I think we said frame 15. Sometimes this is a bit annoying. You have to kind of click away and drag to get it to move. We'll say frame 15. Just right click at frame 15, add key. And I'll just create the other keys as well before we start adjusting the actual value of them. So they're all just set to 0 at the moment. So it grabs the object, comes back, and by about here, where it's kind of interacting, and this is the other character mesh, by the way, so the preview, the hands don't quite look right, and they're kind of clipping into the character. And that's because we've just got the Quinn model as the preview rather than the Manny one. I'll just switch that. So when it gets to here, we don't want any adjustment whatsoever, because then that'll make it so that it doesn't match up with whatever's on the hip. So if you imagine it was like picking up a weapon and holstering it, you'd want that to be exact at this point. So you don't want any modification by control rig at this point when it's reached that point. And so around here somewhere, I'm going to add a key. And this is when it's going to be completely back to normal. So just right click, add key. And now what we're going to do is just move this middle one. So this is when the character should have actually grabbed the object. Select that key, and up at the top left you'll see 0.5 and 0. Just select this, and if you hover over it, it doesn't actually tell you what they're for. Okay, so that's the time on the left. So that's at 0.5 seconds. If I select this key, you'll see that that's at 1.3 seconds. This one's at 0.1. So at 0.5 seconds, we want the value to be 1. So I've just tapped in 1 in the right box. And you'll see that now we've got a curve, although it's a straight line curve, where it ramps up to there and then comes back off. And maybe just around this point, we'll keep the full adjustment. So essentially, because the character's hand is still on or near to the target, we'll keep the full amount of adjustment that we're going to make throughout that until the hand starts coming back, and then we'll fade it off. So let's just add a new key around there and set this to 1 as well. So our curve ramps up, locks there, and then fades back off. Okay, so we can just save that montage. And now in the animation graph, we're going to add in our slot animation so that it plays through a specific slot. What I'll do is I'll just do this before our control rig node. So you can just right click, search for slot, default slot, select that. And if you click on this, you can change up at the top right in the details panel the slot name. So instead of default slot, we want to use our hand grab animations. So all we need to do is pass in the current pose to the source. And then this goes as it was, so back into control rig. So it's just intercepted the point from there to there with this. And as things are now, you should see no difference whatsoever. It's not locked the character into a specific pose or anything like that, that you can still run around and move the character. But if we're going to our third person character now, so the third person blueprint, and let's do right click and just search for left mouse button. What we're going to do now is we're going to play an animation through that specific slot. So we're going to play this grab animation montage. So right click, search for play montage. So on pressed of left mouse button, just play montage. We need to tell it which skeletal mesh to use, so that's just our mesh, character mesh, drag that in. Montage to play is grab animation montage. And here you can change, for example, the play rate and so on. We don't need to adjust any of that. And in an actual game situation, you're not just going to do it whenever the character presses left mouse button. You'll do things like checking there's an actual object there to grab, maybe making sure the character stops moving so that it's stationary when they're grabbing it if you want that. Maybe make sure that they haven't recently just pressed left mouse button to grab something, because you don't want them to be able to just spam click it and it just keeps, playing and repeatedly trying to play the animation. You want to make sure that it's completed before they're able to click again and so on. We won't be going into too much of that, but just so you know, as things are now, you will just be able to spam click left mouse button. So let's just see what that looks like. So if we just go into the level, and we've got the other adjustments applying already, but if you just left click, you'll see that the character reaches forward and plays out the animation. You'll see that the character's kind of like going floating into the air a little bit. What I'll do is Okay, so the reason for that is it's not passing through this control rig node. It's kind of after that control rig node, and this is adjusting the position of the character and the character's feet. I think for now I'll just skip over that control rig node. So this is the inbuilt one, and now you'll see that it's not making the character raise up and float up in the air. The character's not quite touching the ground, so just in our third person character, I'm just going to move the character down slightly. Well, I mean, it's close enough, but... And what you could also do, I've just taken it out of the loop just to simplify things, but you could always just put this at the end, or put this further in, or put it after this hand grab animations, slot animation. But I've just taken it out because it's just going to cause some confusion. All this is doing is just doing RK traces to try and lock the feet to the floor, and it brings the character up or down to reach the floor. But that's not important for what we're doing. So I think to keep things simple, I'm just going to cut this apply additive, the left-right blend, out of the mix. So I'll just move that down. The head's still rotating, so we'll be changing control rig, so that won't be a factor in a moment. But we just don't want the body to be rotating. So you should just have the character moving around. His head will be looking weird at the moment, but if you stop and left click, you should see the grab animation. That's the only thing that matters. So in control rig, I think for now I'll just cut everything out. So I'll just alt click on that just to set everything back to default. So it's just not calling any of this, and we may incorporate this later. So I'll just explain the approach that I usually take for this and what other people tend to do, and why my way is, I think, better. I mean, at least in this case, there's some scenarios where it won't quite work the same, but what people will normally do is, let's just set the preview animation to specific animation, and that's going to be our grab animation. Grab montage I've used. I'm not sure if that makes a difference. I don't know if the curve comes through if we put that in as a preview. So what people would often do is just make it so that based on that curve that we ramped up to the point where the character grabs the object, they would map that to moving the hand towards a target. So it would just move the hand towards some target and blend towards that target position. So it would just gradually blend towards this new target, wherever the new position is. Now that kind of works, but it's basically two animations fighting against each other. You've got this underlying animation where the character reaches and grabs, and then on top of that, the hand is just kind of warping to some target. And based on the curve, it's just kind of a fade between the two. So it's a fade between this standard animation and then the hand just going bloop, bloop, and warping to the target. We're not going to do it that way. We're going to figure out where the position of the object would be. So in this case, it's here, our imaginary object. We'll find the difference between this position and the actual position of the object from the world. So let's just say, you know, it's down here somewhere, or just to the right of the character. Whatever the difference is between the two, we'll treat that as an offset. And we're just going to gradually offset the animation where he'd be reaching slightly to the right because the thing's to his right, rather than it just targeting that. So all the animation will play out the same. His hand speed will still be the same, except just over time, it's just gradually offsetting. Like, you can think of it as it's just rotating the arm more and more until it reaches the target, rather than it just piloting the hand from there to there with a blend. And you'll get a lot more natural motion out of this, and it'll preserve the underlying animation. So especially if you're doing things where the exact positioning of the hand and elbow and so on is relevant and you want to keep the underlying animation. So, for example, if it was a punch animation, you want to keep the form of the punch looking good, and you don't just want to be warping the hand to wherever it needs to go. You want to offset the whole body, offset the arm, and it's only tweaking it where it needs to. You're not sort of fighting against it with a separate animation where it just warps a hand to the target. But anyway, hopefully, as I go through it, that'll start to make sense. Now, for the benefit of people that don't know what the full body RK node is or how subchains work with the full body RK node, so if you've not seen my previous courses or videos on this topic, I'm just going to quickly run through what that actually does and how it works. You can probably skip this video if you do have a good knowledge of how subchains work with the full body RK node. But so just for the sake of example, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make it so we can offset his hand by moving a control point around. So I've just gone in the animation, scrolled through to where he grabs the object roughly. And then I'm going to search for hand R. Right click on that, new element, new control. And now we've got a control at that position. So that's currently not doing anything. It's just a sphere that's not moving, it's not controlling anything. In the graph, I'll right click and do full body RK. Plug that in. Now the root, this should be, if you hover over it, it tells you the topmost skin bone. So that's going to be the pelvis in our case. And for effectors, the thing that we want to affect is going to be the hand. So it's the hand R. So click the plus icon, and then in the drop down, the bone should be hand R. And you'll see everything's gone chaotic. And that's because we haven't plugged in a transform yet. So it's just telling the hand R, try to reach 0, 0, 0. And it's successfully doing that by just shifting the whole character down. Instead of having no transform plugged in, we'll use our hand R control, drag that in, get control, plug it in there. And now you can see things are back to normal. But if I move this control around, you'll see it's just dragging the whole character. We don't want that. And if you just compile, it goes back to the default position that you created the control in. What we want is, we want his pelvis to stay in place. We don't want the whole character to move when we move the control. So drop down settings, root behavior. This is just telling it how it should treat the root bone, which in our case is the pelvis. So we're going to set that to pin to input, and that just means that it can't move from whatever is input. So before the full body RK node, whatever is happening, it just locks that root bone in place. And now what you'll see when we move this control is that he's moving his arm, but he's also sort of warping his body around to try and reach the target. So what the full body RK node does is it tries to reach the target, and you can have multiple targets. So you could have one for the right arm, one for the left, one for his legs and so on. It tries to reach that by making the minimal changes possible to actually get that target point. So to get the specific bone, in this case hand R, to that target, what are the minimal changes it can make? So whilst naturally a real person, if they had to move the hand from there to there, they just rotate their elbow and rotate their arm. But what's easier for this, the least dramatic changes to angles, is to just actually rotate the whole body. So it's just leaning back and leaning forwards. There is some movement of the elbow as well, but it basically just iterates through and does the minimal change that it can until it reaches the target. So that works in some situations, but in our case where he's just moving his arm, he should pretty much be able to do this just by rotating the upper arm and the lower arm. And that's where subchains come in. So subchains is making a smaller chain that it tries to solve for. So you can think of a chain as, by default, what we're doing now, there is a chain from this bone, hand R, all the way until it reaches the root bone that we've chosen. So that means it's a line going down the lower arm, the upper arm, through the clavicle, spine 5, spine 4, 3, 2, 1, and then it gets to the pelvis. So all of the bones in that chain are being modified and rotated in order to reach this target. Now with subchains, what we can do is specify, first, let's try to solve it only using, let's say, 2 bones in a chain. So that would be the lower arm and the upper arm. So it first tries to solve it just by making changes to those 2 bones. If that fails, then the rest of the body gets engaged, so the rest of the chain will be used. So to enable subchains, under settings, you should see sub-iterations. So for sub-iterations, I'm going to set that to a value of 20. And that's just how many attempts it makes, how many times it iterates through making changes to try and solve it, to try and reach the target. So I just use the value of 20 just to match the regular iterations that the full body RK node uses. Then we need to tell this specific bone, so under effectors, we want to tell this bone that it should use chains or a subchain. And that's where this chain depth comes in. So the chain depth is how many bones it tries to use in solving it. So as I mentioned, we're just going to tell it to solve it with 2 bones, so the lower arm and the upper arm. So set chain depth to 2. And now when we move it around, you'll see that it's just using the hand where it can. So if it can be solved just by rotating the lower arm and the upper arm, it will do that. If it can't, so it has to reach, you'll see that the rest of the body starts to get involved. Okay, so hopefully you've got a basic understanding of that. As with anything, once you start playing around with it, you'll get more familiar with how that works and what different values do. So just an example, I'll use chain depth of 3 for the hand R. And that will mean that it's not just the lower arm and the upper arm, it's also the shoulder as well. So now you'll see some shoulder motion involved. And that might cause a little bit of weird warping. It kind of works within a certain range, might help out. A chain depth of 4 will also include the top spine bone. You can see that's causing weirdness, so we don't want that. Let's just set it to 2. So what we'll be doing is we'll be basically figuring out what is the difference between the position of the object in this animation, so wherever this arbitrary position is, and wherever the actual position is, so let's say that's over here somewhere. So it figures out, okay, the difference between that is we just need to shift to the left slightly. So all we'll do is we'll get the regular hand position, wherever it is, and we'll just say shift left by a certain amount, controlled by our curve, so it'll just shift it left more and more and more. And so it'll just be making a minimal adjustment by offsetting the regular hand position. And then it should eventually reach the exact position, the exact target that we have from the world. So I'm first going to run through the setup just to get it to work within Control Rig before we actually start involving a real world position that it's trying to target. Because the switch from having it working in Control Rig to in the actual game, that should be quite easy to do. So if you skip the last video because you already know how full body IK node works, the current setup is I've got the full body IK node, currently got a control, which is the hand control plugged in, sub iteration set to 20, chain depth of 2, and root behavior pin to input. So what we'll do is we're going to make a control which is going to represent this hypothetical position that the character is grabbing. And I'll just unhook the full body IK node for now, just so it's not making any modification. So we're going to figure out where this actual position is. So to do that, I'll just right click on, let's say, the root, do new control. And I'll just change this, change the color of it. So in the details panel, shape properties, I'll change this to blue or purpley. And I'll just move this to where it looks like the character is actually grabbing. So just from this axis, it's like there somewhere. And this axis, it's there. So let's just say that that is the position that they're targeting. So if you pressed compile now, it would reset the position of this sphere. So if you right click on it and do 0 offset, now that's just set it to the default position of this sphere. So if you compile, it should just stay in place. I'm going to duplicate this and I'll rename it first. I'm going to rename this to animation grab target. And I'll duplicate it and I'll call it real grab target. So that's where it would be if it was in the actual game world. And I'll just change this one to greenish. This color picker's not really working for me, but okay. I'll just move this somewhere else. So it's, let's say, here. And then right click, 0 offset. Now we should be able to compile. So this is where it is trying to grab based on the underlying animation. This is where the object really is. So eventually we'll be passing that in as we did with this look at target. We might even just borrow that just to keep things easier. So what we're going to do is we're going to find the difference between this position and this position. And all we'll do is the full body IK node is just going to modify the hand R position from whatever it is already, so that we'll get the existing hand R position, but then we'll just add on this offset, so this positional offset, and then that will go into the transform. And then over time, we'll just scale the offset from 0 to the full offset based on the curve value. So first, let's just do the offsetting part. So what we'll do, let's get the animation grab target, bring that in, get control. And our real grab target, let's drag that in, get control. Drop down the transforms. We only care about the translation in this case. You could do the same for rotation as well, of course. But just to keep things simple, I'm just going to do it with the translation. So we'll take the real grab target. So I'd actually just swap the order of these just to keep things simpler in my head. So the real grab target's the one at the top. So I'll take the translation of the actual target from the the world, the real one he's trying to grab. Subtract the position of where he is grabbing based on just the animation. And that should give us the difference between the two. So basically, how much do we offset the animation to reach the real grab target? And now in the full body IK node, what we're going to do is do a get transform. And we'll get the hand R transform. Drop down the transform, and drop down the transform in the full body IK node. Plug a rotation in, we're not modifying that. The translation is going to be the translation plus, so just add from that, whatever this offset is. So plug that into B, and then plug that into translation. And then connect the full body IK node up. And now you can see that he's grabbing this arbitrary, well, the real world target. So when I move this around, so I'm just moving the real grab target, you can imagine that's just an input. He's moving his hand to grab that object. And if we play through the animation, you'll see that it's offsetting the whole time. So if I move this around, you'll see that it's offsetting his hand even when his hand's just by his side. So it ultimately will grab the target at frame 15, but it's already offsetting even before it starts grabbing. And also once it's grabbed, so it'll bring the arm back to some weird offset position. Now, we don't want that. So rather than, I'm just going to space things out a bit. So rather than just using this full offset at all times, what we're going to do is scale it based on the curve. So because in the preview settings, I'm using the specific animation, which is the montage, that has the curve information in it. So we should be able to read that from within Control Rig. So if we right click and do get curve value, you won't see it on here yet because when we created this rig, we didn't actually have that curve, so that didn't exist relative, with the character. So just go to curve container and we need to add a new curve. And also I need to remember what the curve was actually called. So in our grab montage, we called it hand grab curve. So right click on any curve, just do add curve, hand grab curve, compile. And now we should see hand grab curve in there. And I don't for some reason. Oh, there we go. I just have to compile and it seemed to show up. So we've got this hand grab curve. And I'll just print the value just to check that it's working. So I'll just plug that value into there. And you can see it's printing a value now. So here it's printing 0. It ramps up. Now it's printing 1. And now it comes back off. You might not be able to see that too well, but that's what's happening. So I'll skip over that print now. Get rid of it. So all we do is we just take this offset and we just scale it. And the factor we're going to scale it by is just our curve value. And then we'll plug that in. So now you can see that at the start of the animation, his hand is in its default position. But he reaches and now he grabs the new target and then it returns back to the default position. So we've successfully managed to offset the animation and we gradually apply that offset. And because we're doing it gradually, there's no sudden jump. So it doesn't suddenly just, move the arm to the side or anything because we're controlling it using this curve. So all we need to do now is make this work with an actual target in the game level. So as I mentioned before, I'm going to use this look at target just to save time, so we don't have to create a new variable and we don't have to pass it through the animation graph and through the event graph and so on. I'm just going to reuse the look at location that we've got in this third person character. So in the event graph, when we do left mouse button and it plays this montage, I'll just choose a random position that's somewhere around here where, you know, let's pretend where the object is trying to grab is. Now, as we did before, what you could do is you could get all acts of class or get a specific actor or get an overlapping actor that's nearby and find a real object in the game. Hopefully you understand how to do all that now. So what I'm going to do just to cut corners on that is I'm just going to randomize a position that's somewhere in front of the character. So I'm just going to add a billboard. So search billboard and add that as a component. And I'm just using this as kind of a placeholder object. So I'll just place this somewhere in front of the character. Let's say there. And in the event graph, when you click the left mouse button, what we'll do is we'll get the billboard and we want to get world location. So I've got the location of this billboard. We're going to add some random vector to it. So just do add. Now right click, do random unit vector. So this is a random single unit vector in some direction. I'm just going to multiply this and then right click the bottom so you can change it to a float. So we're multiplying this random unit by a random float now. So I'm just going to right click, search for random float in range. And let's say the range is between 0 and 40 units. And then plug that in. And then we plug that into the add. So now it's just offsetting this by a random 40 units, or up to 40 units. It can also offset it by a lot less than that. And just to make sure that all looks good, what I'll do is I'll do a draw debug sphere. So when you press it, we'll draw debug sphere. Plug that in as a center. I'm not too sure what radius would work there. I'll just do a radius of 20. I'll give it some thickness. And for duration, let's just check our animation again. This is totally unnecessary. It's just to make it look better when you're previewing it. So here is when he grabs the object. So what I'll do is I'll make it draw debug sphere when you click, and then just as he manages to grab it, so just as he this curve editor's thing, this montage playback's weird. So just as he grabs it, it'll disappear. So it will, from here, when he clicks, we'll be drawing a sphere where he's going to grab, and then it'll disappear around there. So in brackets, you should be seeing the timestamp. So this is 0.50, so that's half a second. So in our third person character, we'll set the duration to 0.5. So it'll just draw the debug sphere whenever you left click for 0.5 seconds. Now it's not going to be reaching for it yet because we've not actually passed that information through. I just want to check that all that's working. Okay, so it's doing it. It's drawing the sphere, but it's quite a large sphere. So I'll change the radius to 2. And I'll just change this range down to like a random 20 units. Okay, so it's randomizing the position that it's targeting. And just as he actually gets to the peak of his grab animation, it disappears. And now what we need to do is, once we choose this random location, we actually want to set this look at location to be that target. So just drag in look at location, set look at location, connect that in, and plug this in. And instead of having this plugged into there, I'm not entirely sure, I can't remember now. It's been a while since I've done normal blueprints. It might make another random unit vector and random float, so it might change. So I'm just going to do this. So it sets it first to this look at location, and whatever that's set to, that's where it's drawing it. And now in control rig, in our My Blueprint tab, we've got this look at target. We're going to use that, so the position of that, instead of the real grab target. So drag in look at target, get look at target and plug that in as A rather than using this temporary control that we had. And now what we should see is when I left click, we made a mistake. And hopefully you know what that is, so take a guess at why weird things are happening. You guessed it, we need to convert it from world space to rig space, because the full body IK node operates in rig space. This is a world space value. So we just drag out from that and do from world. And I wish I could pretend I did that on purpose, but no, I did just forget to convert it back. And now what we should see when I left click. Okay, now it's gone worse, so now I don't know what's happening. Let's just double check things. So the look at target, we are setting look at location. Okay, so because on event tick we're also doing this, we're probably overriding the value. So even though we left click and we've set the look at location, event tick is running every frame from what we were doing previously. So I'll just disconnect that. And now, third time's the charm, when I click, he grabs that target. And you can see that it's randomizing it, but he's grabbing it each time. It's not randomizing it too much, so I'll probably just increase that just so it's a better demonstration. So I'll just change it from 30 to maybe, 20 to 35. Now this isn't going to always work. We're going to get cases where his body starts leaning and it looks a little bit weird. I think maybe with the numbers we've got now, it's going to be fine. So it's reaching towards it, just playing the animation as normal. Okay, so that seems to work. If I did increase the random offset, let's say I did 55, I think at this point, if it's 55 units away, we'll start to get some leaning, yeah. So some of the time it works, sometimes we get a slight lean and then it goes a bit stupid like that. So there's ways that you could solve that. You could make it so that if the target that it's reaching for is too far from the player, you could move his pelvis. So within control rig, you could make it so it leans the body forward or just moves the body forward, keeping the feet in place. You could move the character, so you could actually get the character to move using the third person blueprint. The most sane choice would be to only allow him to grab objects that are within reach, rather than him being able to grab things like, okay, bad example, another bad example, another bad example. I'm just wanting one where it, yeah, like that. So you wouldn't allow him to reach something that's that far away. And the simplest way of doing that would be to have, in the third person character, you could have some collision box or sphere that's somewhere in front of the character. And then to check if they can actually grab something, what you do is when they try to grab, so that let's say they press the left mouse button, you would get the overlapping actors of the collision sphere that you've created. Check if any of those are, let's say, an object that has a pickup tag or something like that, something that the character could actually pick up. And then just as a sanity check, you could also check the distance between, let's say, the character or the character's head or the character's arm and the target, just to make sure that it's actually within range. Even though it's overlapping, it might not be exactly within range that you want it to be in. And also you might want to do a line trace just to make sure the character can see the object, because he could technically be overlapping something that's within his range that he can grab, but he might actually be just facing a wall, and the object might be behind the wall. So you'd want to make sure that the character can see the object he's trying to pick up and so on. That's just all some basic stuff that you do within the blueprint. But I'm mainly focusing on the control rig and the animation side of it. So hopefully you've managed to follow along with that. So I've just changed the range down to 35 there. So hopefully you've been following along and you've managed to make something that looks somewhat decent, where you've got an animation which is dynamically being modified. And as I say, this can work with picking up objects, it can work with, you could be punching towards a target, and all of the exact same logic would apply. The only thing that you need to do if you're going to be changing the animation or using a different animation would be, okay, so that's weird because we don't have a look at target by default, but what you would do is, I'll just disconnect everything just so we can see. All you do if you're changing the animation is you'd need to position this target point, this control, to wherever the actual target is. So if you had a different animation where it's like, let's say throwing a punch, then you'd say, okay, so this is where the animation will hit, and then the rest just works the same. The offset will still apply and calculate as it should do. But yeah, so we're just using this control just as a reference point of where the actual target is based on the underlying animation. So you would have to change that on a per case basis for different animations. So you could have as many of these as you want. You could duplicate this and have animation grab target, then you could add animation punch target, animation uppercut target, whatever you want. Oh, and I just thought of something else, just an extra little tweak that we can make. When he reaches towards the target, we can make him look at it as well, because we've already got the aim math set up for the head bone. So within Control Rig, I'll just copy this where we're doing the aim math, and then we limit it to within certain angles, and then set the transform of the head. I'm going to skip over this curve part, because if we actually modified this curve and we had that actually being used by the animation graph, if that came after the slot, it will essentially modify the rotations so that our animation no longer matches up. So where we've specified like this as the target point, the animation grab target, if we're also modifying the animation where we're tweaking it so it's looking to the left or right by some animation blend, well, that will actually be wrong, and then our offset will be calculated wrong. So just keep that in mind. If we put it in before the slot animation, then it will just be overridden by this slot animation anyway, so it won't actually be used. So things will still work, but it will actually have no benefit. There's different ways that you can combine things, so you can do different ways to apply the animations. So you can apply things just to specific bones, for example, or you can use like absolute positions rather than like relative to the parent bones and so on. I'm not going to go into that, but there's quite a lot you can do within the animation graph. What I'm going to show is just getting it to look towards the target. So I'll just select all these nodes. So that's the aim math node, set transform, and all the calculation involved. I'll just copy it, and I'm just going to move the old ones out of the way. I'll just paste it up here. So we're going to the full body IK node. Then after the full body IK node, we do the set transform of the head. And it's all getting a bit messy, but I just wanted it to as a quick test. So we need to plug something in for the target, this aim math node, and it's going to be this, look at target from world. Paste that in as a target. And this weight value, so currently it's always just going to be fully looking towards the target. And I'll just show you what that's like. So currently he doesn't have a target, he's looking up in the air. I click, he's looking at the target. He stays looking at it. I click again. Well, it didn't make much difference that time. You can see his head's just twisting to look at the target, and it just stays locked looking at it even after he's picked it up. So the slight tweak we can make, this weight value can actually be controlled by our curve. So if we just get curve value, I'll just paste that over here, plug that in to the weight. And now you see that his head just gradually looks towards the target. And maybe he's looking at it a bit too much. Most of that would be done with his eyes, so rather than actually rotating his head. So what you can do is just get this curve value, multiply it, multiply by 0.5, for example, and then it's just using a lower weight for the difference that it's making to the head. So it's just more of a subtle look towards the object. It doesn't make much difference, but since we already had it, I just wanted to just show you how to combine the two.